Hey guys, welcome to this new video. This one is another of my Q&A videos that I'm doing in this month of June. So again, if you still have questions, feel free to hit me up with those on Facebook, for instance, or my Patreon page. You can ask me there and I'll get to it. So this one's from Tim Bullard. He asked me on Facebook, and Tim asks, do you believe that proper self-defense can be taught without a serious study of what violence really looks like? And should that include physiology, psychology, and body mechanical studies, as well as a study of sociology and other relevant factors that surround any use of force events? I thought about this a little bit, and there's different ways I can approach this answer, but I'll do it this way. Overall, I would say it can be done, but I think it's a lot more difficult. And then it becomes a very complex story um, if I want to explain this correctly. But I'll give it a shot. So I think it can be done, but it depends on where you live, for instance. There are people who live in very difficult circumstances, who grow up in a violent layer of society, and they typically learn as they grow up how to handle that on all the different levels that you mentioned, and much more, because that's their daily life. They understand violence because they see it every day, so to speak, and they live it, and they have people that they lose, and if they're not careful, they end up dead themselves. So they work in this environment, and it's just something that's a part of their life. Not necessarily something that they are extremely preoccupied with, although obviously it's going to influence a lot of their decisions and their actions. But it's not like it's constant study or constant work necessarily. It's just living and adapting to the society that you live in. And it can be very strange. And I'll tell you a story from my dad during the Second World War. He was a child. He was very young. But one of the things he and his friends did was steal ammunition from the German army, and then they would unscrew the bullets and pour out the gunpowder and then light it up and see it go off, and that was their idea of fun. So and then yeah, obviously when if he got caught by his dad, he would be in trouble. But just to give you an idea, that it's the Second World War, so it's a global war, it's a huge conflict, and my dad was having fun with his friends stealing ammo. So that was normal back then. That was his thing. So my point is that um, we would, for now, consider that extreme, but back then in that situation, it wasn't. He wasn't the only one doing that because his friends tagged along, and I'm sure other kids did similar things, or perhaps even a lot more extreme. So my point is that if you grow up in a certain society, in a certain with a certain amount of violence, I think you kind of automatically roll into it. You have no choice, because if you don't survive. So, and then a lot of the teaching is organic in the sense that um, you have to listen to your parents often a lot more because there's no argument. There's like, okay, you're not going outside right now because it's too dangerous. Literally, people are dying. Yeah, I want to go out. No, you can't. And if necessary, they'll make sure you can't leave. Um, so you organically learn a lot of the things that you should know to keep yourself safe, and should you use force, that you know how to use it. If you're not living like that, all right. So if you live like many people in the West, you live in a part of society where violence is actually relatively rare, or it is not as nearby. So you'd have to travel not necessarily very far, but it's not something that is in your immediate area, not in your place of work, and it's only when you travel certain places or you're in transit that you might encounter it, which is a lot less than if it's actually on your doorstep every single day when you go out the door. So that's the case for a lot of people. I think in that case, I think you really need to try to get as much as possible a comprehensive training approach towards self-defense, and using force to defend yourself. You mentioned some of the stuff, and I'm going to go over it. So physiology, I think you need to have a working knowledge of the functions of your body, of the different organs that we have, how it works, and so on. At the very least, so you know how to take care of yourself if you do have an injury. So you know what to take seriously and what not, what is less of an issue. An absolute minimum is knowing when you need to go to the hospital. Like, I can't fix this. This is not going to get better by itself. I need to go. And sometimes it's just touch and go. You have to get lucky. For instance, I once had a student many years ago, and after a few months of training with me, he confided and he said that he'd been stabbed. And it was this really long story that I'm not going to go into, but he'd been stabbed, and he hadn't realized it at first. He felt pain in his stomach, and he's like, "Crap, what is this?" And he cursed at the guy who did it, and that guy then ran away. But then suddenly, when he noticed he was bleeding, he realized what had happened, and he panicked a little bit, and he went to the hospital. And then I told him that he was extremely lucky because it was less than an inch removed from puncturing his liver, and if the knife had gone a little bit deeper, then he wouldn't have been there. So, and that is an example of, you have to understand that if your liver is punctured, that you're in a really bad situation. It's not like, I'll just walk it off, or I'll have a good night's sleep and it'll be better in the morning. That's not the case. So understanding at a very basic level, you don't have to do advanced medical studies, but at a basic level, what are the different systems that we have in our bodies and how do they function? That is something that I think is a minimum for anybody. If you're a teacher, obviously, that is something you need to know. If you're a practitioner, even if you just do it in a recreational fashion, I believe you absolutely need to just know how a human body is, how it functions. For instance, um, a liver shot. You get punched or kicked in the liver. It hurts. It hurts a lot. But unless something, the liver is ruptured, or he broke one of your ribs on the way to landing that shot, unless that happens, the pain goes away, and it goes away pretty quickly. So even it's like, if you're a little bit lucky, depending on how hard it hits, but like a minute later, you're fine. You don't need to get another shot there in the liver, because you're gonna go down again, obviously, and maybe stay there for a lot longer. But that liver shot just hurts a lot, but it's not necessarily permanent damage or something that you need to immediately go to the hospital to. Again, it depends, right? So I'm not giving medical advice. I'm just talking from experience, from both receiving liver shots and dealing them out to many people. It's something that, once, if you know the pain, you can fight through it. And I think it was either beginning this year or last year, I don't remember. I was sparring with one of my students. He's heavyweight like me, and he is spitting backache, and it just, it nailed me. I thought my block was okay, but he just got his heel underneath my block, and he nailed me in the liver. And there I was for the next 30 seconds at the very least. I was trying to hide, not grimacing and not showing any pain on my face, and trying to move around a little bit, and obviously keep that elbow tucked in tight, so he wouldn't hit me there again. And at the end of the round, I told him, like, I almost went down here, because you hit me square in the liver, and it was excruciating pain. But here's the thing, as it happened, my first thought was like, ah, damn it, and the second thought was like, it's gonna get better. So having been there, having experienced that, is a huge difference than if it's the first time you get hit in the liver, or like the first time you get hit in the diaphragm. It's panicking because it's organ pain, which is a very different kind of pain from, for instance, breaking a bone or muscular pain. It's just different. Um, if you haven't experienced it before, it can be quite disconcerting, to put it mildly. So if you know, like, right, that's what a liver shot feels like. It's not the same as somebody punching you in the gut. It's not the same as somebody punching you in the face. But like, okay, you get to recognize it once you've had it once or twice, like, right, this is a liver shot. And then you can deal with it. If you have a ruptured liver, which I've seen fights where that happens, that's quite different. Getting up is no longer an option. You're gonna stay down. So that's different. So that's what I mean with, just at the very least, having a functional knowledge in general of how your body works can be to your benefit in many different ways. Then we have psychology. I believe that you need to know how the brain works. Again, on a basic level, you need to know how it responds to adrenal stress, which is what you typically will have once you're in a self-defense situation. The reactions that your body has on a physiological level to the adrenal dump, and how that affects your brain, how your brain functions. For instance, we know that if it's the first time that you have a huge adrenal dump when you get attacked or you have to fight or defend yourself in whatever manner, if it's the first time, it's going to be very difficult to have a clear head, because that's a new experience for you in that case if you haven't trained for that or you haven't experienced similar things before. So we like to think that we will react a certain way, but you never know. It can go either way. It can go many different ways, depending on context and so on. And just because you usually react one way if you do have experience, that doesn't mean you always will. Just because you are you for instance, instead of flight or freeze, your instinct is to attack whenever you feel threatened. That doesn't mean you always will, and vice versa. If your instinct is to freeze or to try to run away, you shouldn't assume that this is a given, that it's fixed and it's written in stone. It can change, and it often does change with people, depending on context, depending on circumstances, with training and so on. So understanding how that kind of stuff works, I think, is a good help to preparing for a self-defense situation. Because one of the worst things is that if you don't know why the adrenal dump happens, how it affects your bodily functions, how your stomach drops sometimes if you have it an extreme one. Your legs might start to shake, and the only thing that you can think of is that I'm a coward because I'm trembling here. I'm a coward. No, you're not. You're not used to this kind of adrenal dump, and your body is actually preparing you to do something about what's going on. It has nothing to do with cowardice. And alongside with that, all those things that you're experiencing on physiological level and how your mind's working, all that kind of stuff is not has nothing to do with your intentions or with your feelings and so on. It's just a part of your brain that is taking over and trying to manage the situation best it can. So in that regard, I think it's not understanding that is something that can cost you dearly, because you might assume that, well, once what I can do in training when there's no real adrenaline, for instance, if you train a certain way, you might assume that I'm really good at that. So once I get into a fight or have to defend myself, I'll behave the exact same manner. It's not quite the same. I'll give you an example. One of the things I've seen over and over in the many videos where you can see that is that if there's two people who have a knife, what you suddenly see is they like to stay at long range. They really don't like to just close by running forward because the other guy can stab them. But as soon as one or both of the people, if one of both people loses his knife or slips and falls and so on, the other guy pounces, he closes in. Now you can say that, well, I've been training for years in, let's say, Filipino martial arts on how to close the distance against the knife and so on. And you've done all the training drills and all the exercises and so on. You train real hard, and you do some sparring in class and so on. And you're getting quite good at it, right? And the first time when it's for real, it's different. It's not the same. And the parts of your brain that you trained to do all those drills and get good at that, maybe not, but they might not work completely in the same fashion. Now, I've also seen it that people who are just not, they don't realize the danger they're in, and they actually pull off some nifty stuff. And afterwards, like, holy crap, I could have died. But in more cases, I think, again, this is my opinion, so I could be wrong, but I think in most cases, you don't rise to that level of training, which is your best level in the gym, the first time you end up, or if you have the unfortunate luck to have several of such real life encounters, that you don't always do all that great in the beginning, just because the adrenal dump gets you and you're not used to it, and your brain and your body are actually fighting against you in a certain way to perform in exact the same manner as you do in class. So you need to know how this kind of stuff works, and your training needs to reflect this, which means that do a lot of technical training and then work through different gradual steps towards more and more stress, chaos, and increasing the adrenal dump if you can find a way to trigger your body into it. Again, you have to be careful with like this kind of stuff. It's another long discussion, but I believe that's important. Moving on to body mechanics, as you mentioned, so there's different kinds. I would say find one that works for you. Relying on brute strength is a losing game in the long run because you get older. So eventually you won't have it anymore. And in the short term, it's unpredictable because you might be very strong, and that is often something that gets you a long way. But what if you eventually find a guy who's stronger than you? If you don't have good body mechanics, that might mean that that's a fight that you're not going to make it out alive, or that you end up in trouble. If you had also worked on your body mechanics, that might make the difference. The whole point of body mechanics is that you more efficiently use the strength that you do have. So the result is that you need less strength to get the same thing done, which means that you can be more effective, and that you can use the stress that you have, the strength that you have left that you didn't just kind of waste away by not having good technique. You can put that in the next technique and so on. So I would definitely talk about study body mechanics and train to improve yours, because it's an area in which you have a lot of growth throughout your life. I've been training for over 30 years now, and it's still something that I'm working on. And most high-level martial artists and self-defense specialists that I know are always working on refining their movement. So that's body mechanics, and then you mentioned sociology. I would say yes, but with a caveat, and that is, I would say, start in your own society, the place where you live, learn about the different layers of that society and how they change over time, and how to behave in one layer and then the other. What kind of interactions are normal in one layer and not so much in the other, and so on. Which means that you go out of your comfort zone. You go to layers of society where you normally wouldn't go, in a sense that you don't have to stay there, obviously, but you need to know how things happen over there, and then you have to either go there, yeah, hopefully in a careful manner, or with somebody as your guide, basically. And which doesn't mean delve into the underworld, so to speak. That's not what I mean. What I mean is that try to get information about how things are over there, so that if you end up having to face somebody from a specific layer of society, is that his way of reasoning is not uncommon to you, in the sense that you kind of know how this guy thinks, and you know what you should and shouldn't do, or what you need to take seriously, and what is maybe not as important, which might be the total opposite in another layer of society. So start with your where you live, and work from there. And it's a continuum process. It never stops, because societies always change. Now, I will add to this that don't assume that those specifics are universally true. So on the one hand, don't assume that what works in one layer is true in the other, because it often isn't. And also don't assume that it's a global thing that is always going to apply. And that can change, for instance, from city to city, from state to state, and obviously from country to country, from culture to culture, and so on. So things that might not get you even noticed here in Belgium, where I live, might get you beat up in the US in certain places, and vice versa. So don't think that it's just universally that everything applies when you start looking into it a little bit deeper. I'll give you an example. I was talking actually yesterday to one of my students, and he's led an interesting life. And I mentioned that he coaches a soccer team, and there was this a while ago. He mentioned there was this thing where trouble was brewing between the two teams that had just competed against each other, and it was like, okay, the fight was about to break out, and somebody said like, go get that guy, and I'm not going to name any names. And my student said like, no, don't go get him, because he was trying to calm things down. And he said, because that the kind of guy that you were getting is a guy who's been on the wrong side of the tracks pretty much his whole life, prison time and so on. What he does when they get him is like, he shows up, he puts a ski mask on, gets his AK-47 out of the trunk, and starts pointing it at people like, I'm going to light some people up. that's the way he thinks, and he thinks he's actually doing a good thing. He thinks that he's right in doing so. Now, obviously, you don't want to be there when that happens. That's another story. But my point is that for something that is actually a minor social conflict, some people will start yelling, other people will start pushing and shoving, still others will fight, still others will use knives and other weapons. And then you've got other people who just show up and they'll start shooting everybody. And so what is totally out of line and something that in many social strata is something that you don't even consider, like using lethal force, shooting people up over a silly argument on a soccer match. It's like, doesn't make any sense. Like, how can you think like that? Well, in certain layers of society, that is actually quite normal. I'm not saying it's the whole of society. I'm not blaming anyone. I'm just saying, like, okay, this people think differently and act differently in different circumstances, depending on how you grew up, where you live, and so on. So my point is that what I said before, don't assume that everything applies universally, because I don't think it does. Um, that's what you mentioned. I would add two more things to that I think if you're going to study self-defense, add for sure add those to the list. There will be first aid, so that you have basic first aid. The Red Cross offers many training opportunities all over the world. I'm sure there are other organizations wherever you live. It usually it's either free or it's at a very reasonable fee. Just go do that. Just go learn CPR, go learn basic first aid and so on, so that you at the very least know how to take care of yourself if you're injured when you have to defend yourself, or you can take care of one of your loved ones who becomes a victim of a violent encounter, or just a stranger or whatever. It doesn't have to be rocket science. You don't have to become a doctor. It's not necessarily, but just some basic stuff in the same vein as learning how the body works, learning some physiology. Well, learn how to take care of it. So I would definitely recommend that. And then the final point would be learn about the legal system. Self-defense in the society that we live in is going to mean that you will be in touch with the law and police and so on. So what does that mean? Well, you need to know what does self-defense mean where you live, not where I live, where you live, or where you are in the country that you're traveling in and so on. You need to know how the legal system works. And then that starts with understanding what are the legal aspects, so what are the requirements before you can claim self-defense, what is and isn't allowed. And then we have, so to speak, the reality of the way things work, and that is, well, you might say, well, the law says this and this, but then when the cops show up, they just arrest you and take you away. And well, yeah, that's how the system works. That's how law enforcement works wherever you live or wherever you are at that point in time. So it's that they just, in many cases, they just grab everybody, they take them downtown, and they try to figure out like what happened. Guess what? He's gonna say you did it when he attacked you. That's very likely to happen, and he might actually believe that. He's not necessarily lying. He might be entirely convinced that it's your fault. And you say the same thing about him, and the police doesn't know. They were there. They're like, okay, we don't know. Just grab everybody. Let's go down to the precinct, and we'll sort it out there. And then you're into the system. That means that you're going to be held, and that might take a while. If you're unlucky, you're staying the night, or you're staying longer, even if somebody dies. So you really don't want to be in the system. You really don't want to go through that experience. So if you know how the law works and how in practice, in reality, how it is applied by law enforcement, and then later on in a court case, for instance, the DA might decide that it's an election year and that he goes after the kind of violent crime that you were involved in, or the kind of violence, sorry, what I meant to say, the kind of violence you were involved in, then he might try to make an example of you, where normally he wouldn't. Well, if you're unlucky, that means that you're in for a rough ride. Okay, you need to know upfront what that means. So the whole point of self-defense is to defend your life, to defend your body. That includes being able to live your life and not go to jail. And this whole thing, what is it? I'd rather be judged by 12 than carried by 6. That kind of nonsense. That is complete. it's a total cop out. It's such a stupid statement, and I'm saying it's stupid because has it ever entered in your thick skull that maybe it's not either or? Maybe you can stay alive without ending up in jail if you just think about it and maybe prepare accordingly, right? Like, Jesus Christ, maybe just figure out what the law wants from you before you start shooting left and right. So it's kind of mindset that just bugs the hell out of me when people say that because it kills the conversation, and it's like this trump card that they throw on the table like, haha, see, I've said this and now you've got no more arguments. But it's nonsense. It's utter nonsense. So learn what the legal system says and try to keep out of jail. If you don't think it's important, fine, good luck. Vaya con Dios. I wish you all the best. And if you stay out of jail your whole life and you do nothing but be involved in violence, fine, excellent, good for you. But you know what? First time you end up fighting a guy and you ignored everything the law says about self-defense, and he's a little bit clever, and he knows how to talk to cops, and you don't, and you end up saying stupid stuff to the police, and they write everything down, and that's a statement that is used against you in a court of law. Guess who's going to jail? Doesn't just because you're right doesn't mean that you will receive the justice you think you're owed. So legal system, study it. So that's pretty much it. Of all the things that I mentioned, I would say this is all specific to you as an individual, all those things that you study. Your environment, your society, your particular body type, your psychological makeup, your character, your personality. So it's very specific to you. There will be overlap to me and everybody else, but there will be big differences. And I think you shouldn't assume that you know everything there is about violence because of the experience you have and training you have, or that your knowledge applies all over the place. I'll give you two examples. Police officers, law enforcement officers often have a lot of experience with violence. But in the vast majority of the cases, their experience with violence is always when they are in a position of authority. They have a legal authority to arrest people and give them commands that they have to follow and so on. As a civilian, that's not the case. That's not you. You don't have that authority. You don't get to arrest people just like that. You're not a law enforcement officer, so your experience with violence will be different. There will be overlap for a law enforcement officer with what civilian self-defense is like, but there will be big differences. Again, remember Randy's law, the differences are just as important as the similarities. Interpersonal violence is very different from the violence that law enforcement encounters. Another example, I used to know a bouncer, and he was feared because he was very effective. He would knock people out left and right and just take them outside and be done with it. But all that was predicated on him striking first. So he had a lot of experience and skill in preemptive striking, but he had very little skill and experience in counterattacking when the other guy got the shot off first, or counter ambush when he was basically caught, not paying attention and they ambushed him. He had very little experience with that because he never got there, because he managed to avoid those situations. So that made him an expert in preemptive striking, but not necessarily in counter ambush. Avoidance, yes, but not, okay, what if you didn't avoid it? What if you messed up or you couldn't avoid it? How do you act then? So his experience was mostly theoretical on that front. So what I meant is that the training that you have and the experience that you have is individual to you and your specific environment and the context that you use it in. It doesn't universally apply. Again, similarities and differences, but assuming that, well, this is what it's like. I know what violence is like because I'm a bouncer, because I grew up in a bad neighborhood, because of whatever, it doesn't matter. I'm not discounting the experience that these people have, not at all. Quite on the contrary, I think it's better to have experience than to have none. Obviously, that should make sense. However, claiming that because you have specific experience that it applies universally, that I think is a mistake. And I'll take the example of the military. Um, that's their job, using violence. I'm oversimplifying, but if there's any group of people who has experience with violence, it's the military, right? But they specialize. They specialize. Arctic warfare is not the same thing as trying to shoot it out in the desert with another army. It's not the same thing. You need different equipment, you need different clothes, you need different tactics. It's not the same thing. Naval warfare, it's not the same thing as fighting in the air. Yes, there are similarities, there are huge differences, and the differences matter. That's why there are different branches in the military, duh, right? So why not have the very same approach when it comes to self-defense? And I think this is something that, especially martial artists, but also self-defense practitioners, we need to be a little bit more humble and accept that, you know, whatever experience we have, this is our little thing, and we do the best we can, and we try to teach and grow and help other people defend themselves. But if you assume that your stuff is so awesome it's like universal, it applies anytime, any place, anywhere, okay, well, then I think you're misguided. So that would be the really big caveat that I would place on everything that I said before. And I'm done. That's it. That's as Austin Power said, I'm spent, baby. So Tim, I hope this is a good question, a good answer to your question. If you have any comments or feedback, let me know, and I'll see if I can give you another answer then, or a better one, or whatever. So that's it. Everybody else, hope you like this one. Please share, like, subscribe, let everybody know. If you want to support the work that I'm doing, head on over to my Patreon page. Go to patreon.com/Wim Demeere, my name. Sign up there and a bunch of stuff there. And failing that, I will see you all next time when I answer the next question. Take care.